everyone, welcome to another episode of Bridging the Gap. This is a little precursor to the actual interview. I just wanted to tell you guys what to expect about the next few interviews coming up, which are basically all going to be young people, bright people, Gen Zers that are trying to make a difference in their community right here, right now. So I think that it was important to give you guys that little bit of information going in, and along with that, I just wanted to apologize. This video interview was done over Zoom, and there were some technical glitches in there, so I wanted to apologize to you now, and I wanted to apologize to the people over at the ACC who are the ones that we were interviewing for this episode. So I wanted to apologize that the technical difficulties did come into play here, so there might be some cuts in the interview. So sorry for that, but I still hope you enjoy. It was a great interview. It was great to sit down with Karli and the people over there at the ACC. So without any further ado, here is our interview with them. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Bridging the Gap. I'm obviously AJ Malillo, as you guys are aware of at this point, and Steven's going to hop on in a little bit. He had a bit of attending to some emergencies that he had to do, but we are very excited. If you guys aren't aware, Friday is Earth Day, and so with that, we are excited to have a very important guest. She is from the American Conservation Coalition. Her name is Karli Matthews. Karli, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to have you guys, and welcome to Bridging the Gap.
Thanks, AJ. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we wanted to just jump in and we tell us a little bit about the ACC. What is your mission? What is your guys' goal? And just talk a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, so ACC was started in 2017, actually with a tweet saying, if you're a conservative and you care about climate change, what if we started our own organization? And so since then, now 5 years later, we're really building the conservative environmental movement. And we're doing that through having our activists get active on the ground, doing tree plantings, cleanups, hikes, discussions, and then they turn around and advocate for federal solutions like the Great American Outdoors Act, which passed in 2020, or the Energy Act of 2020. So we're a group that's trying to kind of get back to the Republican Party and the conservative movement's conservation roots.
Yeah, I think that that's awesome. And I think that the big point that you put there is the conservation roots. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I think that people sometimes forget that Teddy Roosevelt obviously was a Republican president, and he was really, really big on conservation, and that's why he's on the Mount Rushmore. So talk a little bit about the conservative roots that you had mentioned there, because I think too often this has been given basically to the left of the American political spectrum, but you're trying to, and pardon the pun, but bridge the gap back over to the conservatives. So talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So yeah, Teddy Roosevelt was kind of known as the father of our national parks. He actually didn't found the national park system. He created the first national park. And then later the national park system was founded. But even more than that, Richard Nixon founded the EPA. George H.W. Bush signed really critical amendments to the Clean Air Act, which is why areas of the United States have breathable air. You used to have to wear a mask in Los Angeles, not because of wildfires, but because of bad air quality. So there really has been a lot of successful environmental stewardship coming from the right side of the aisle. I think we've just seen in the past 3 decades that climate change specifically has really caused a political wedge, whereas both parties were really able to agree on conservation or kind of environmental protection. This idea of climate change became very, very polarizing, and you had denial from the right, but you also had alarmism from the left. And there have been predictions, the world is going to end because of climate change that simply haven't come true. And we have a generation of activists who are scared for their lives because of climate change, rather than being, happy warriors and optimistic and, looking to innovate to create a better future. So I think there have been challenges on both sides of the aisle, but it's absolutely true that Republicans or conservatives in the United States care about the environment, and we have a history of doing so.
Sure. So I think that the big thing to talk about now going forward is, obviously we laid the groundwork that the conservative side of the political aisle isn't necessarily anti, conservation and even anti-climate change per se, but that's often the the attack that comes after the conservative movement. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are the conservatives' vision, um, on climate change, and how we can effectively curb some climate change if we can?
That's a great question. And I think the biggest difference between a conservative and a progressive approach to climate change is the role of government, right? On the progressive end of things, you see the Green New Deal, you see Build Back Better. These are really widespread federal government plans to tackle climate change from the top down. And something that conservatives believe in is the power of federalism and local and state governments, and kind of, putting responsibility at different levels of government rather than handling everything at the federal level. And even beyond government, empowering the private sector and having a sense of community. So I think that's the biggest difference, in that from progressives, you're going to see really ambitious federal government plans to tackle climate change. From conservatives, you're going to see kind of a carrot over stick approach. You're going to see, investing in innovation, incentivizing innovation, empowering businesses to tackle climate change, streamlining regulation that is really holding back clean energy projects or other, climate change initiatives. So I think that's the difference. You're not going to find, silver bullet solution, or, a purported silver bullet solution from the right. It's going to be more of a patchwork of, how do we tackle, innovative technologies like carbon capture? How do we modernize the nuclear energy sector? How do we help nature fight climate change? Whereas on the left, you're seeing more of a, how do we restructure our economy to adjust to a changing climate, and to transition to 100% renewables?
Yeah. So do you think that there's a little bit of both that is needed there? There obviously a free market solution is important, and everybody needs to be on board, but I can see the government having a say in this, especially the federal government. I mean, the United States is a country of 330 million people, with a wide array of different, natural landmarks here, there, and different landscapes across the country. So I would say that there's definitely a need for the federal government's standpoint. So is there a way to sort of bring these two sides together on an issue like this?
We certainly hope so. And that's why at ACC, we're not a free market organization, we're a market based organization. So we absolutely believe that the federal government, and state and local governments are needed to tackle climate change. We've advocated for federal legislation that is either energy or conservation or climate based. So there's absolutely a role that the government should be playing. It's just that sometimes the government isn't the most effective actor. And as much as it's about getting the government to act, it's also about getting the government out of the way where it needs to be out of the way.
I think that that's fair. And Karli, this show is about the people more than anything else. So I want to talk a little bit about you as an individual here. And I want to know what got you involved in the ACC, but more than that, what got you involved in discussing climate and climate change and trying to fix these issues. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and climate change wasn't something I thought a ton about growing up. I grew up in a conservative area where it wasn't necessarily, a big topic of conversation. There weren't people protesting in the streets of my hometown that doesn't have a red light. So it wasn't, top of mind necessarily. But I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid. My dad is a sportsman, so he was hunting and fishing. And I remember gardening with my grandfather. And I think those experiences just kind of give you an inherent love for the environment and appreciation for the environment that surrounds us. And then when I got into college, I knew I was right of center. So I started getting involved politically with conservative groups on campus. And it really bothered me that no one was talking about not even climate change, but just the environment generally. And if it was like to, kind of poke fun at progressives and, call the Green New Deal stupid or whatever it be. And I thought we were really missing an opportunity as conservatives to talk about the issue in a way that was compatible with our principles, and recognize that like we do have environmental challenges, and it's okay to say that. It doesn't mean you're not a conservative because you acknowledge that. So I was really excited to find ACC in, I believe, summer of 2018. So it was about a year old. And I got involved as a volunteer, kind of worked my way up. And by the time I was graduating, there were full-time positions open, and I became communications director. And, it's been really fulfilling seeing activists like myself kind of go through ACC's educational resources and activism and events, and see them kind of, develop the passion that I have for these issues. And it's great to see, more and more right of center young people talking about the environment in a really productive, pragmatic way.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's another thing the show is all about. It's getting Gen Z involved in whatever the issues that they find the most compelling and important. So obviously, you are a young woman yourself. I would imagine Gen Z, as well as Stephen and I. So I think that is really important. And how do you appeal to a young Gen Z millennial age group at ACC? What are you as an organization doing?
Absolutely. And I mentioned before that ACC began with a tweet, and we're certainly very active on social media. And, as silly as it might sound, making memes about clean energy or about conservation and kind of meeting young people where they're at. We recently got involved, we got on TikTok, which I don't understand really as a platform, but doing my best to integrate myself into that. But I think Gen Z is generally just a very activism driven generation, and we as young people like really want to make a difference and want to make our mark. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to Gen Z. I think younger generations typically, kind of want to stake their claim on something. But I think especially with social media and the internet being so widespread, we're able to really, make connections and communicate with each other in a way that other generations haven't been able to do. And that's been really kind of used to move activism forward. And that's something that here at ACC, we're really kind of plugged into, and making sure we're appealing to every audience possible.
Yeah, I think that the key word that you kept putting out there was activism. I think that's a really fun word, because I feel like it's oftentimes attached to a more progressive ideology, because it's activism, right? The conservative doesn't want things to change, so to speak. They want to keep things the same. So what that word activism seems to be attached to progressivism, and I'll say the cold shoulder for the conservatives. So what kind of activism are we talking here? Because obviously the ACC tends to be a right of center organization. So what is that activism? What does it look like?
Absolutely. So when you think of perhaps progressive climate activism, you think of young people skipping school on Fridays for the Fridays for Future strike. You think about protests in major cities. And that's just not ACC's approach to activism. There was an E&E News article in 2018, I believe, that said, we were kind of buttoned up and, not your typical climate activists. And something that we really value as an organization is simply having a conversation. And when we have meetings with legislators, we're not gluing ourselves to their office doors. We're, sitting down and having a conversation about our love for the environment, why we care about this issue, and how we can, move the needle forward in a way that's compatible with conservative principles. So I think something that we're just really passionate about, but also, dedicated to, is having productive conversations and, putting the facts out there, connecting them to our personal experiences, but not doing so in a way that's, kind of your average climate activist protesting. It's more of, information sharing and having a productive conversation. And we found that to be really effective with Republican legislators.
Yeah, I think that having a conversation is an important thing, and it's a big tenet of Stephen and I's relationship and our show as a whole. Now, earlier in the interview, you had mentioned that you came from a small town without even a traffic light. Now, I also came from a small town without even a traffic light in it, and Stephen came from a small town with what, maybe one or two traffic lights in it?
Two.
Two? Okay. So we all come from these small towns. Now, Steve and I's are a little bit different than yours. We grew up on the beach. I grew up right by the bay. Steve grew up right in the middle of the ocean and the bay. And so climate and the environment are crucial to how we grew up, because we've seen with our own two eyes what, I'll say, Mother Earth has the ability to do to human beings and our civilization as we know it. And I think that this might be an appropriate time for Stephen to talk a little bit about, because you had mentioned how important the climate is. And I think that that's really where the left and the right can come together. I think we all understand how important the environment around us are. And I know that that's a big thing for Stephen, is sort of respecting the environment for what it is. And I think that, Steve, I want you to obviously talk a little bit about growing up in between the bay and the ocean, and that respect that you earn for the environment, and how this is definitely an issue that can bring people together too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, listen, I look this way and I can see the ocean. I look this way, I can see the bay. There's days where I can't sleep because it sounds like the ocean is knocking on my front door. And growing up in that kind of environment, you learn exactly how powerful those forces of nature are. And I think in their power is where they earn their respect, because as a bit of a backstory, and I think we discussed this on a prior episode also, I suffered some loss and damages to my home as a result of Hurricane Sandy in 2012. So in loss, also you gain that respect as much as you do as an admiration of the power of those things. But I think that also works the other way. The more that we lose nature, and the more that we exert our own human power over nature, we kind of lose that respect. And I would be remiss if not to be the liberal voice on the show for a brief moment, and just kind of push back and say, I personally, and this is maybe an issue that we could explore a little bit about messaging, to me, and that perspective that I have, to call a conversation activism, I would be hard pressed to call that activism. And that's why I think the environment is such a divisive issue, is because it appears on the conservative side that you can just kind of talk about it and let the market decide it, and that'll be fine. To somebody of my persuasion, a conversation isn't enough, and the free market is driven by profit. And I think that would go back to what I was saying before about us exerting our power and our lack of respect over these things, and kind of losing sight of the perspective of how it should be. We look at this thing, we see its power, and we respect it. Now we want to exert our power over this thing.
So Karli, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back. Our conversations have resulted in legislation passed, and Republicans who have, supported, whether it be, energy solutions or conservation solutions. So I think, going into a legislator's office and actually trying to convince them in a way that is productive, and not just kind of something to be able to post on social media is really important. To your points about, kind of the power of nature and experiencing a natural disaster yourself. I mean, I think that anecdote is really, really powerful. And it's why we have to tackle climate change, because of the human impacts that it has. And with New Jersey, especially, I went to school in Philadelphia, so I'm familiar with the area. This idea of mitigation and adaptation as, a two-pronged way to tackle climate change is super important, because we can talk about reducing emissions for the future, and that's critical. But to kind of adapt to natural disasters like you all experienced with Hurricane Sandy is equally as important, because we're already facing the effects of climate change. So this idea of local resilience, of helping to bolster our coastlines and prevent future damage is really, really important. And we even saw that in New Orleans this past fall. The damage could have been worse if they hadn't kind of bolstered their coastline after Katrina. So there's a lot to be done. And you're right, just having one conversation isn't enough, but I would be remiss if I didn't, kind of defend our approach and say that those conversations have resulted in change.
Yeah, I would say that I think that both sides here have very valid claims. Obviously, conversation doesn't get everything done, but conversation is important, and that is an important step in the direction. And sometimes that strong, as you mentioned, gluing yourself to the door of a legislature, sometimes that also gets things done. And I think that what's big with this debate is that there is a lot of people that sort of want the same end goal. And I think that as long as we want the same end goal of a strong environmental, I'll say, policy, whether that be on a free market side, a government side, but basically making sure that we aren't destroying our environment and we are understanding the effects that human beings have on the environment, as long as we share that end goal, which I would say that majority of our generation does, we can definitely work together to getting towards whatever that end goal is, which is very important. And there can be argument and debate on how that's done, sure, but I think that as long as we have the same vision in mind for the future. So I wanted to move over to energy as a big thing. So what is ACC's platform when it comes to moving towards green energy? Obviously, we're in the middle of a big issue in Russia and Ukraine, a war that has affected our prices at the pump. It's affected our prices of just heating houses. Luckily, we're heading into summer, so that won't be as big of an issue, but things like that. And so what does the ACC say we should be doing? Should we be pushing back towards natural gas and oil, or should we be looking towards a different energy source for the future, whether that's wind, solar, nuclear, etc.?
Absolutely. So this has, obviously been a huge conversation since Russia invaded Ukraine, and there were, rising energy costs before that, but this was kind of the catalyst event that got a lot of folks talking about rising energy costs. And there's kind of been this dichotomy between, folks on the right saying, okay, we have to drill more here domestically, and we have to, transition back to more fossil fuels because that'll lower costs. And then we have folks on the left saying, this is why we should have been 100% renewables yesterday, and then we wouldn't be reliant on Russian natural gas. And the fact is, neither one of those approaches is correct. We shouldn't rely wholly on domestic fossil fuels, and we simply cannot transition to 100% renewables ever, but certainly not tomorrow. And what's really important to note here is we really, especially in the interim, we need an any of the above approach. We need fossil fuels still. I know that's not a fun thing to say, but we do. There's absolutely no way that we can sustain the energy use that we have right now on wind and solar and geothermal. It's just not going to happen. And we also need nuclear power. I think a lot of progressives kind of dismiss nuclear power because of some of the drawbacks it has, like just getting rid of nuclear waste or overall cost. But nuclear power has to be a part of our energy future as well. And especially in the interim, natural gas is going to be a really critical fuel to heat our homes and to make sure that we have sufficient energy. So I think it's really important to kind of break through the rhetoric on both sides and say, no, we shouldn't be 100% fossil fuels, but we also can't be 100% renewables.
Yeah, I think that is a very fair point, is that we're still at a point right now, at least, and I don't know, I'm not expert enough to say whether or not it will always be this way, but we're definitely at a point right now that we can't have completely renewable energy. We still need natural gas, and we still need fossil fuels to power us going forward. But I think that personally, the push towards green energy, especially nuclear energy, like you had mentioned, is important, and it's a big step in getting towards that clean, more renewable energy sources. And I'll let Stephen jump in here for anything that he would like to point out, add, whatever it may be.
The only thing I would offer is that it seems like, again, communication on this issue between party lines would be, why do we have to sustain the use that we have now? I think a big push on the left has always been to decrease our energy use and be more conscientious of how we use energy to make the transition to 100% non-renewable sources easier. And I say this all the time, and again, I'm not a representative for big party Democrats or big party liberals, but the notion that the left just wants to consume as we do, but transition tomorrow to entirely green sources is erroneous, and that's not what the real people on the left stand for. I think a left's perspective on the energy would be, first of all, it's incumbent upon us and it's incumbent upon big energy users, corporations, to find ways to decrease that and become more efficient. And then as we become more efficient, make those transitions so we can wean ourselves off of damaging fossil fuels. So, but the notion that we have to just sustain the use that we do now, which I'm fairly certain was the language you used, is a major communication issue between the parties.
Yeah, so sort of cutting back on usage as a whole would be the position of the left, and I would say that it might be fair to sort of discuss that with major corporations. I think the biggest problem that we might have is individual usage. You know, people still need certain things within their homes, and they still need to get to work and drive their cars and do all of those things, right? So Karli, would you have anything to add with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think energy efficiency is absolutely important and should be something that we're focused on. But I don't think that saying like, oh, we can use less energy so then we can transition to renewables is like, I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification. I think we should be able to, transition to energy sources that we can use at similar levels that we do now as we, get more efficient and we build buildings that are more energy efficient. I mean, like cities are kind of creating new zoning laws and creating new standards of building that will be more energy efficient in the future, but we still have, like, I live in an older building right now, and that's where I live, in an apartment right now. So I just, energy efficiency is a goal we can work to, but that's not a replacement for the energy that we need.
Sorry, everybody, we had a little bit of technical difficulties here while we were recording, but we're running out of time now, so we're gonna ask Karli a couple questions to wrap up. The one question I wanted to ask you is, on your website, there's a lot of pictures of your volunteers out there in the community cleaning up, making an active change in the communities that they're in. So let's talk a little bit about that. And if you can mention in your answer sort of where your outlets are across, because I know you're all around the country. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, AJ. So we're in 130 communities across the country, including a new branch in New Jersey. And our key states are Florida, Texas, Washington State, Arizona, Ohio, South Carolina, and Tennessee. But we are active in nearly all 50 states. Those states are just the ones that we've put a little bit of extra effort in really building out our grassroots base and moving the congressional delegation toward climate action. But we're really passionate about getting our activists, getting their hands dirty, planting trees, cleaning up their community parks, to really give them a stake in the environment and remember what we're fighting for.
Yeah, I think that is definitely important, and it's getting the hands dirty, actually physically getting hands dirty in cleaning up the climate. And I think that is quite important. And I would also, the next question I would like to ask is where people, if they're interested in getting to know more about the ACC and joining the ACC, where can they find you? Where can they find the organization? How can they contact you guys? Everything like that.
Sure. So our website is acc.eco, and our social media handles on Instagram and Twitter are acc_national. You can also follow me on Twitter at Karli Matthews_. Same thing on Instagram. And we have a few forms on our website that you can fill out, or you can contact us on social media to get involved with one of our branches.
Absolutely. And I, before I wrap up here, I just want to say that although this argument, I won't even say argument, but conversation can get contentious at times between the left and the right, that doesn't mean that it's something that you should shy away from, right? Hard conversations need to be had, especially with hard issues like climate change. And again, as I had mentioned before, as long as we're looking forward at the same end goal, the conversation on how to get there, while important, I think it can take sort of the wind out of the sails, but it doesn't have to. We should all be trying to get to the same goal, which I think that we all are for the most part, and that is to keep our environment clean and healthy for our generation, the next generation, and so on. But we do have to wrap up, unfortunately. And Stephen, I'm going to throw it to you for our hardest question of the interview. It's the question that we ask everyone. So Karli, I'm sorry, this is the hardest one, and Stephen is going to ask it to you right now.
Yep, I got one more before that. I was
sure.
curious. I was going to ask before if there's any way people could kind of keep tabs on or find out about the legislation that your conversations have helped pass.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find it on our website at acc.eco.
Awesome. Anywhere in particular, like to navigate towards?
Yeah, it should be in our policy resources.
Awesome. So the last question, most important question for two Jersey guys, is the Jersey show. We got branches in Jersey. It's all about Jersey over here. So we got to know. We asked everybody, like AJ said, the big enchilada here. Bruce Springsteen or Bon Jovi? Who you putting on?
Oh, that's hard. I think I would say Bruce Springsteen, actually. But Taylor Swift is my favorite artist, so I'm not an expert either.
Well, you know what? I think the answer of Bruce Springsteen won you a lot of brownie points over there with Stephen. I'll tell you that. That's his guy.
Definitely did.
So, you know what, Karli, thank you so much for coming on and having the conversation. Like I said, like we've said throughout this whole thing, this is a very important conversation to have. And it's good to know that there are people on both sides of the aisle that are pushing and fighting for a more sustainable future. And so thank you for doing that, Karli. It was a pleasure having you on. I hope that you can come on again sometimes. Hopefully it'll be a little bit of a cleaner thing and there won't be so many issues, but thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so everyone, that was another edition of Bridging the Gap with AJ Melillo,
Stephen Rombola.
I hope you have a wonderful week, and tune in next week when we have Chris Contos on. He's a student down at Georgia Tech to talk some more about the climate and energy policies going forward. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.